Here is what nobody tells you about the 10 plagues of Egypt. They were not random disasters. They were not a furious god throwing chaos at an empire. They were a precise, calculated dismantling of an entire civilization's religious system, one deity at a time. Egypt had over 2,000 gods. They had a god for the Nile, a god for frogs, a god for the sun, a goddess whose sacred animal was a cow, a god who protected their harvest. Their Pharaoh, the man who sat on the throne, was not just a king. He was considered the living son of Ra, the sun god. He was divine. So when Moses stood at the edge of the Nile, 80 years old, an escaped murderer, a former shepherd, and raised a wooden staff over the most sacred river in the ancient world, he was not launching a disaster. He was declaring war, and each plague that followed was aimed at a specific target. By the time the 10th plague had passed through Egypt at midnight, there was not a single household that had not felt the power of the God of Israel. Not one. The Pharaoh, the man who claimed to be a god, was on his knees asking a shepherd to bless him. This is every plague God sent to Egypt, and it is far more calculated than most people realize. Before we get to plague 1, you need to understand what Egypt actually was. In the ancient world, Egypt was not just a political empire. It was a theological one. Every force of nature, every body of water, every animal, every astronomical body had a deity attached to it. These were not abstract ideas. For the Egyptians, gods were embedded in the physical world. The Nile wasn't just a river. It was the domain of Hapi, the god of the annual flood, and without Hapi's blessing, no crops, no food, no civilization. Ra was the supreme deity, the sun god, whose power was visible every single day when the sun rose. His son on earth was Pharaoh. So when Pharaoh said to Moses, "Who is the Lord that I should obey him?" This wasn't stubbornness. This was theology. In Pharaoh's worldview, there was no God above Ra. There was no authority above Pharaoh. That is the context for Exodus 12:12. God says, "I will bring judgment against all the gods of Egypt." Judgment against all the gods of Egypt. Let me decode what that phrase meant in this world. For Egypt, if a god failed, if the Nile turned poisonous, if the sun disappeared, it did not just mean disaster. It meant their god had been publicly defeated. In the ancient Near East, when two nations went to war, everyone understood their gods were also at war. The nation whose army won, their god had won. This was the accepted framework, so this is the frame. The 10 plagues were not chaos. They were a theological confrontation structured in 3 groups of 3, with a final, singular act standing alone at the end. Plagues 1 through 3 target the water and earth, the physical foundation of Egyptian civilization. Plagues 4 through 6 target the animals and bodies of the people, their sacred livestock, their health, their healers. Plagues 7 through 9 escalate to the sky itself, hail, locusts, darkness. And plague 10 is different from all the others. We will get there. But here is the thing that changes everything when you see it. God did not crush Egypt all at once. He gave Pharaoh 9 separate opportunities to change course before the final plague ever came. 9 warnings, 9 chances. Pharaoh said no every single time. If this is already landing, hit like right now. That one action tells the algorithm this video is worth pushing to more people. And subscribe so you don't miss where this is going. We are just getting started. Plague 1. The Nile turns to blood. Moses struck the Nile with his staff. Every drop of water in the river turned to blood. The fish died. The river stank. Exodus 7:21. And the Egyptian magicians, watching this happen, replicated it, which actually made things worse. They could add blood to the water. They could not remove it. Think about what this meant in their world. Hapi, the god of the Nile's annual flood, was responsible for the fertility of the entire land. Without the Nile's flooding cycle, no silt, no crops, no Egypt. Hapi was not a minor deity. He was foundational. And a shepherd from the desert walked up to Hapi's river and turned it to blood with a stick. Hapi did not respond. A personal observation here, the magician's ability to replicate the first two plagues is often used to dismiss the miracles. But think about what replication actually required. They had to find water that wasn't already ruined to demonstrate their power. They were working from a depleted supply. Moses had unlimited reach. There is no comparison. Exodus 7:23 records Pharaoh's response. He turned and went into his palace. He was not moved. The Nile was ruined. He walked away. Plague 2 frogs. Frogs do not sound terrifying, but the frog was the sacred symbol of Hikit, the goddess of fertility and childbirth, depicted with a frog's head. Frogs were sacred animals. You were not permitted to kill them. So when millions of frogs swarmed out of the Nile and invaded every home in Egypt, every bed, every oven, every food bowl, the Egyptians faced a paralyzing dilemma. The animals were sacred. They could not kill them. And the goddess whose symbol was the frog, the one who was supposed to protect Egypt through fertility, had sent her own creatures to make life unbearable. Here is something that often gets missed. The magicians matched this plague, but they added frogs. They could not remove a single one. Only Moses could remove them when Pharaoh begged, and the moment relief came, the moment the frogs died and the crisis passed, Pharaoh reversed his promise before the dead frogs had even been cleared from the streets. Exodus 80:15. He changed his mind the moment the pressure was gone. Plague 3 gnats. Moses struck the dust of the ground. Every grain of earth in Egypt became gnats, swarming, biting insects covering humans and animals. Exodus 8:17. The Egyptian magicians tried to replicate this. They failed. They went to Pharaoh with a confession that shook the court. This is the finger of God. Exodus 18:19. Not a god. The god Egypt's own magicians, the men whose entire professional identity was built on supernatural access, acknowledged that what Moses was doing was categorically different from anything they could produce. 3 plagues in. The most sacred river is ruined. Sacred animals are an infestation. Even the ground has turned hostile. Pharaoh was unmoved. Plague 4 introduces a change that nobody should miss. For the first 3 plagues, Israel in the land of Goshen suffered alongside Egypt, starting with Plague 4. That stops. Exodus 8:2-3. I will make a distinction between my people and your people. A swarm of flies, some translations say beetles, overran every household in Egypt, every room, every marketplace, every street. Pharaoh called Moses immediately and offered a deal sacrifice to your God, but do it here in Egypt. Stay within our borders. Moses refused. The point was not a ceremony inside Egypt. The point was departure. The flies cleared. Pharaoh broke his word again. Plague 5 livestock struck with a deadly disease. Exodus 9:3. The hand of the Lord will bring a terrible plague on your livestock in the field, on your horses, donkeys, camels, cattle, sheep, and goats. In Egypt, cattle were among the most sacred animals in the entire pantheon. Hathor, one of Egypt's most beloved goddesses, was depicted as a woman with the horns of a cow, or sometimes as a cow herself. She presided over love, beauty, music, and motherhood. Apis was a sacred bull worshipped at Memphis. The bull Nevis was venerated at Heliopolis. These were not decorative symbols. These were living theological statements. When Plague 5 killed Egypt's livestock and left Israel's animals untouched, every dead cow was a silent declaration. Hathor could not protect her own symbol. Apis was powerless. The sacred animals were dead, and the livestock of the people these gods did not claim were walking freely. Exodus 9:77 records that Pharaoh sent officers to investigate. Was it true? Not one Israelite animal was dead. It was confirmed. Every word was true. He still refused to release the people. Plague 6 boils. Moses took ashes from a furnace, a kiln, the kind used in brick production, and threw them into the air in Pharaoh's presence. The ashes became fine dust that spread over all of Egypt and caused festering boils on the skin of every person and animal. Exodus 9:10. There is a detail here that deserves attention. The ash came from a furnace. the same kind of furnace in which Hebrew slaves had been forced to labor for generations. The instrument of Israel's oppression became the instrument of Egypt's suffering. Egypt's medical tradition was associated with Sekhmet, the lion, headed goddess of disease and healing, or with Imhotep, the deified physician. Whoever was responsible for protecting Egyptians from physical suffering, they were absent. And here is what sealed it. Exodus 9:11 says the magicians, the men who had been matching Moses sign for sign, could not even stand before him. Their bodies were covered in open sores. The opposition had physically collapsed. 6 plagues in, sacred animals dead, healers sick. Pharaoh's theological support system was visibly failing. His answer was still no. Here is my read on this. Most people frame the plagues as a power display, God overwhelming Pharaoh with force. But I think it is something more specific, a systematic, public refutation of an entire false belief system. Not destruction for its own sake, deconstruction, one deity at a time. Was this primarily about liberating Israel or confronting Egypt's gods? Or are those the same thing? Tell me your take in the comments. I read every one. A fair question, does any of this appear outside the biblical record? Egyptian royal inscriptions almost never document military defeats or national disasters. Pharaoh's recorded victories. Failures disappeared from the official record. This pattern is well documented among ancient historians. The Epur Papyrus, an Egyptian document, describes a period of catastrophic upheaval, rivers running red, fire, widespread death, the collapse of agricultural systems, social disorder. Its dating is disputed among historians, ranging from 2000 to 1700 BC. The specific language overlaps with the Exodus narrative in unusual ways. This document is real. The debate is about its timing and exact interpretation. The Merneptah stele, dated approximately 20 BC, contains the earliest confirmed non-biblical mention of Israel as a people group in the ancient Near East, confirming that a people identified as Israel were present in the region during the general period in question. One other point worth making: the theological precision of the plagues, each one targeting a documented Egyptian deity, reflects an extraordinarily detailed knowledge of Egyptian religious practice. Someone fabricating this story centuries later would need to have accurate information about which animals were sacred, which deities governed which domains, and why the targeting sequence made theological sense. That level of specificity is difficult to explain as invention. Plague 7, hail mixed with fire. Before this plague, something unprecedented happens. God sends a warning through Moses: shelter your servants and livestock. Those who fear the word of the Lord brought their people inside. Those who ignored the warning left them outside. What followed was hailstorm combined with constant lightning strikes, simultaneously, not alternating. Exodus 9:24 says there had been nothing like it in all the land of Egypt since it became a nation. Every unprotected crop was destroyed. Every unprotected animal died. Every tree in the field was shattered. Seth, the god of storms and chaos, was supposed to govern the sky's violent forces. Nut, the goddess of the sky itself, arched over Egypt as its divine canopy. Neither of them intervened. And notice, embedded in this plague, an opt-out, a real one. Egyptians who chose to act on the warning were protected. This was not indiscriminate destruction. There was mercy built into the judgment, available to anyone willing to take it seriously. Pharaoh called Moses. Exodus 9:8-7, I have sinned this time. The Lord is in the right, and I and my people are in the wrong. Moses said it would stop. It stopped. Pharaoh reconsidered his position the moment the hail cleared. Plague 8, locusts. The hail had destroyed the standing grain. The locusts devoured whatever the hail had left. Exodus 10:13 calls it the worst locust infestation in Egyptian history. Before it, nothing like it. After it, nothing like it. Renenutet, the cobra goddess of the harvest and agricultural abundance, was supposed to protect Egypt's crops. She was worshipped by farmers before planting and at harvest. When the locusts consumed everything that remained, her domain was left empty. Pharaoh's own officials finally broke. Exodus 10:7. Do you not yet understand that Egypt is ruined? His entire government was urging capitulation. He offered a partial deal the men could go, but their families and livestock had to remain. Moses refused. Everyone goes, or no one goes. A strong west wind removed the locusts. Pharaoh refused again. Plague 9, darkness 3 days. Total, absolute. Exodus 10:122. Thick darkness covered all Egypt for 3 days. No one could see anyone else, and no one left their place for 3 days. Ra, the supreme deity, the god whose son sat on Egypt's throne, the god whose rising and setting defined Egyptian daily life, whose worship structured their calendar and their entire religious identity. For 3 days, Ra did not exist. The sky over Egypt went dark and did not return, while Israel, across the border, had light wherever they lived. Normal daylight, 3 days of it. While Egypt sat in complete, touchable darkness, Pharaoh made the closest concession yet. Everyone can go, but leave the livestock behind. Moses gave a single answer: not one hoof will remain. Pharaoh threatened Moses with death if he ever returned. Moses said, "You are right. I will never see your face again." Exodus 20:29. He was correct. Subscribe if you have not yet. New video every Sunday. Next week, we go into something most people think they understand about the Old Testament, and almost no one actually does. Do not miss it. Before we reach the 10th plague, a detail that tends to get lost. The Israelites had been slaves in Egypt for approximately 400 years. Not decades, centuries. The generation alive during the Exodus had never known freedom. Their parents hadn't. Their grandparents hadn't. They had been born into brick production and forced labor under foreign masters. On the night before the Passover, while Pharaoh sat in his palace and Moses delivered instructions, ordinary families in Goshen were doing something they had never done before. They were painting their doorposts with blood. They were eating standing up, shoes on, staff in hand, dressed for travel. They did not know if it would work. They had never seen anything like this before. They just did what they were told. 400 years of waiting, and they ate standing up, ready to move, before they had any confirmation that morning would come. Plague 10 stands entirely apart from the previous 9. The first 9 followed a predictable pattern announced, executed. Pharaoh relents briefly, Pharaoh reverses. Plague 10 comes with something different. It comes with instructions, with a ritual, with a meal, with a command to repeat this every year, forever. Each household was to take a lamb, 1-year-old without defect, keep it 4 days, slaughter it at twilight, take the blood and mark the doorposts and the lintel of the house, roast the lamb whole, eat it that night with unleavened bread and bitter herbs, and eat it fully dressed, shoes on, ready to leave immediately. Exodus 12:11, the Passover, in Hebrew, Pesach. The word carries the physical meaning of hovering over something protectively, like a parent throwing their body over a child in danger, not just skipping past, shielding. When I see the blood, I will pass over you. Exodus 12:13. What is being communicated here? An innocent animal died in the place of that household. The death coming through Egypt that night had to land somewhere. For every home marked with blood, it had already landed on the lamb. The price was paid before the judgment arrived. This is the theological structure of the Passover, and it is why the New Testament writers, writing 1,000 years later, describe Jesus as the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. John 1:29. The pattern established here in Egypt was not accidental. It was architectural. It was building towards something. At midnight, the 10th plague struck. Exodus 12:29-30 feet. At midnight, the Lord struck down all the firstborn in Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh, who sat on the throne, to the firstborn of the prisoner in the dungeon, and the firstborn of all the livestock as well. Pharaoh and all his officials And all the Egyptians got up during the night, and there was loud wailing in Egypt, for there was not a house without someone dead. The firstborn. Let me explain what this meant beyond individual tragedy. In the ancient world, the firstborn son was the heir, the one who carried the family's name, its land, its future. The firstborn of Pharaoh was the next ruler, the next son of Ra, the next god, king of Egypt. The death of Egypt's firstborn was the death of Egypt's future. And this was the direct answer to Exodus 4:7-23, something said early in Moses' commissioning that most people skip past. Israel is my firstborn son. Let my son go. If you refuse, I will kill your firstborn son. Pharaoh had killed Hebrew children. He had issued a decree that every Hebrew boy born was to be thrown into the Nile. The 10th plague was not random cruelty. It was specific, proportionate, and explicitly stated in advance. Pharaoh summoned Moses before dawn. He did not negotiate. He did not bargain. He said, go, leave, take your flocks, your herds, everything, and bless me also. Exodus 12:31-32, the man who claimed divine authority was asking a stuttering shepherd to bless him. The Israelites left in haste. The Egyptians, devastated and shaken, urged them to hurry and gave them gold, silver, and clothing as they departed. 400 years of unpaid labor, partially compensated in a single morning. Return to the beginning of this story. Moses stood at the edge of the Nile, 80 years old, an escaped murderer who had spent 40 years as a shepherd, a man who had asked God 4 times whether someone else could do this instead. He lifted a wooden staff, and he struck the most sacred river in the ancient world. This was the river into which Egypt had thrown Hebrew babies. This was Hapi's domain, the source of Egypt's life, Egypt's power, Egypt's agricultural identity. And God chose to begin here, at the most sacred point in the most powerful empire on earth, with a shepherd and a stick. 8 months later, 9 plagues later, Hapi's river was a memory. Hikit's frogs had become a horror. Hathor's cattle were dead in the fields. Ra's sky had gone dark for 3 days over a civilization that organized its entire religion around his daily rising. And on the night of the Passover, the lamb that died in place of Israel's firstborn was the same pattern that would echo forward 1,000 years into a hillside outside Jerusalem, where another innocent substituted for the guilty. And another victory was declared not through military conquest, but through death and what came after it. The 10 plagues were not random. They were a list, a systematic, patient, undeniable declaration that every source of power Egypt trusted was not what they claimed to be. God checked every item on the list. Then he led 2 million people out at dawn. Which of the 10 plagues hits hardest for you, and why? The precision of the deity targeting, the 9 warnings before the 10th, the Passover structure. Tell me in the comments. And if this opens something up for you, share it with someone who is asking questions about faith and history, someone who thinks they know this story but has not heard it like this. I will see you soon.